Well, today, very first day of Journey Church, I figured that we should start with a brand new series. I've never heard of a church that launches and starts in the middle of a series, so I figured we'll start at the brand new series. I did not come up with this title, but the title is The Fundamental List, and I love this title. Kind of a play on words. I don't know if you ever heard of a Christian fundamentalist. It's kind of one of the many branches of Christianity. And don't worry if you have no idea what a Christian fundamentalist is, because that's not what this series is about at all. Actually, it's about the foundations of the faith, and it's about the fundamentals. What does a person need to believe to be a faithful follower of Jesus? That's the question I want to answer throughout this series. What does a person need to believe to be a faithful follower of Jesus? Doing is really important. In the church, you can know a lot of stuff, and I'm sure you've met Christians who know a lot of stuff, but maybe they don't behave with all the information that they believe. And so we want to focus a lot on doing at Journey. In fact, most of the time, my messages are going to be to help you grow as a follower of Jesus, which is a lot more to do with what you do than it is to do with what you believe. But this series, we're going to focus a little bit more on what a Christian needs to believe. And I'll give you a little nugget every week on something you can do, because I just can't handle just staying focused on only what you believe. So we'll do that a little bit. But the focus of this series is what a person needs to believe. What's essential, to reference the series title, what's fundamental, what's the bare minimum a person needs to believe? In other words, if a person doesn't believe these things, they probably can't call themselves a follower of Jesus. What makes this question so confusing for so many people, and maybe confusing for you, it's probably been confusing for all of us at some point, is that the Christian faith is kind of like a giant house full of a lot of different living rooms. And all of those living rooms have doorways that exit to the outside world and enter from the outside world. And they also have these little secret passages between that kind of can connect to each other. And each invites people in, but comes with its own specific terms and conditions. And here's just a few examples of what those rooms are. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch. But we have Orthodox, Catholic, Pentecostal, Reformed, Anglican, Mainline Protestant, Independent Bible, Primitive Baptist, Fundamentalist, and Metropolitan. Now, I grew up Baptist, and I was just thinking about it. Like, you could fill about 100 rooms with just Baptist, all the different types of Baptist. So this house is huge and confusing, because they each have their own traditions, they each have their own expectations, and they each have their own interpretations of the Bible. The main thing they all have in common is that they believe that they're right, and everyone else is only half right, or maybe mostly right, or maybe misled, or misinformed. And I just want you to know, I'm not claiming to be better than this. I'm the same way. I think I'm right, and I think some of these other denominations might be half right, or maybe misled or misinformed. But the truth is this, and anyone who doesn't share this truth, if you ever hear a pastor or a church leader not say this, you got to run fast. The truth is that we're probably all wrong about some things. I know I'm probably wrong. I try to be as right as I can be, but at the end of the day, I'm imperfect, and there's no pastor that's batting 1,000 on getting everything right. But hopefully, we're not wrong about the main and essential things, and that's why this is so important to talk about. But I thought I'd kick things off today by telling you a story about my first run-in with somebody who considered himself to be a Christian fundamentalist. And this isn't to say that Christian fundamentalism is bad. I actually agree with some things. But honestly, if you talk to different Christian fundamentalists, you might get different answers on what that even means, because there's different types of Christian fundamentalists, just like we talked about earlier. But my first experience, I was living in this area actually for many years, and then I moved to Milo, small town, because my dad became a pastor. Yes, one person from Milo. Excellent. I moved to Milo when I was a sophomore in high school, and it's a small town, so everybody knew who I was, and I didn't know who anybody was. They all knew I'm probably the son of the Baptist pastor. So I remember I was sitting in a science class, and I heard my professor say something that made me think, I'll bet he's a Christian. So I mustered up the courage, and I decided I'm going to go and ask him if he's a Christian. So after class, I went up and I said, "Are you a Christian?" And I'll never forget his response. He said, "Yes, I'm a Christian, but I'm a Christian fundamentalist." And as a sophomore in high school, I had no idea what he was talking about, so I had to ask him, what's a Christian fundamentalist? And this is the part I'll never forget. He went on to list a bunch of things that he knew we would probably disagree about. He focused on the things that he knew, hey, I know you're the son of that Baptist pastor over there, and these are the things we're going to disagree about. And he went to list them off. And I won't tell you what all those things were today. But I always thought, why did he build a wall instead of a bridge? We had something in common, and we definitely had some disagreements. But why didn't we focus on the essentials, the things that we definitely agreed on? So, true story, I never had another meaningful conversation with that professor. From that point on, he was my teacher, and I was the student, and that was that. We didn't talk about faith again, because I felt like, all right, you don't want to talk to me about this, never mind. With that story in mind, my goal for this series is to answer the question, what is truly fundamental? What's indispensable? What's necessary? What's crucial? What's central? What's required to believe to be a faithful follower of Jesus? And I'd say probably equally as important is the question, what's not? And we won't get into a lot of the what's nots in this series, but it's a good thing to ask yourself. What's not essential to be a faithful follower of Jesus? What are the things that it's okay for Christians to disagree about? So here's just a few things, non-essentials that can become essential. Number one, things that are comfortable. Things that are comfortable. So like you guys might have walked in here this morning, and some of you might have been comforted by some things and uncomforted by some things. You might have been uncomfortable because of the music. Maybe it wasn't what you're used to, or maybe you loved the music, or maybe the lighting made you uncomfortable. Or maybe I made you uncomfortable, sorry. I can be uncomfortable sometimes. But what happens in church world is things that become comfortable can sometimes all of a sudden start to become essential, and they can start to get elevated in priority, and all of a sudden we expect that those things must be true in order to be a good, healthy church. And usually those things, that's just not the case. The second thing is things that are fashionable. Journey Church would probably be considered a modern church. We're doing more modern music, guitars and drums. In fact, I kind of panicked this week because that song we did at the beginning, somebody suggested that might be from the early 2000s, and I was like, oh no, that might be too old. We're not fashionable enough. We're not trendy enough. Turns out it was from 2017, so I was okay. It was within the last 10 years. We're good. But what happens is a lot of these trendy things can start to become essential as well. Like that's the only right way to do church. You can't do it any other way. You got to be trendy, and obviously that's not true. The other one is traditional. This is what I grew up in, Baptist church. We had hymnals, choirs, robes, pews, and there was furniture that you weren't allowed to touch or you got in trouble. But we were kind of built on tradition. And I saw over time that these traditions ended up becoming more like essentials instead of non-essentials. Like these were just things that were kind of peripheral, but they were made to be essential. The final thing that I want to talk about, and this is a little more serious. There are things that are taught that end up being harmful to people. They're harmful to their faith. They're harmful to their growth as Christians. But what happens is those things start to grow, and they become essential. And if you don't believe these certain things, then you're ousted even though they're actually harmful and they're not even true. So here's why it's important to determine what's essential and what's not. You've likely heard the phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a 16th century German idiom that serves as a warning. In your zeal to rid yourself of something unwanted or harmful, don't inadvertently rid yourself of something valuable and important. And too many people are throwing Jesus out with their church bathwater, and we need to stop that. It's understandable, and here's why. This is why it happens, I think. In every generation, there's new, novel, toxic, cruel, divisive, and even dangerous teachings and opinions that get woven into all those living rooms that I was showing you before in all the different streams of Christianity. These new and novel ideas are often elevated to the status of doctrine, what we teach, dogma, what we demand, and theology, how we think. Non-essentials are considered essential and fundamental, and when we reject these new ideas, non-essentials or fads, we get kicked out of the church. We're not considered a true believer or a true follower of Jesus. But the reality is that when we hold these new novel teachings up to the life of Jesus, they don't line up. They can actually, in some cases, be un-Christ-like, or even worse in some cases, they're anti-Christ-like. They're not like him at all. They're opposite of him. They catch on because at some point, someone was searching for something that they believed to be true, and they were searching for it in the Bible. And what happens is when you go to the Bible and you have an existing bias, and then you try to pull those things out, it's a lot easier to misinterpret what it is you're reading. So here's the reality. A lot of these non-essentials that get elevated to being essential, they actually have some verses behind them that people use to support them. There's often a scripture. But again, when you open up the scriptures and you follow Jesus through the gospel, they don't line up with the law of Christ. These ideas actually conflict with the law of Christ, because Jesus said what we're supposed to do is love one another the way that he loved us, and we're also supposed to love our enemies. And sometimes these new and novel ideas justify and encourage a tone, and a posture, or an approach that's anything but Christ-like. So what happens is mature and honest people walk away from the faith. They just leave the faith entirely. Because if that version of Christianity is all they know, and if their church's teaching is connected with Christianity, they feel they have no choice but to leave the entire faith. Like I said before, in their zeal to separate themselves from something unhealthy and harmful, they separate themselves from something valuable and important. And maybe that's your story. Maybe you grew up and you had a father who went to church and they're not going to church anymore because they experienced Christians who didn't act anything like Jesus. Or maybe it was your mom. I've heard this story many times, that sometimes it's a mom who goes in, they talk to their pastor, and their pastor, they tell them, hey, I'm being abused, and they tell that to their pastor, and their pastor comes back and they pull out a verse, and they say, hey, well, you just need to submit. And then it ends up with a woman who's in a very dangerous position, and they were told by their church that's what they were supposed to do. And of course, that could make it so that person would never go back to church because they've experienced abuse that happened because of something that was said in the church. In their zeal to separate themselves from something unhealthy and harmful, they separate themselves from something valuable and important. If that's you, I understand how you got to the place where you threw baby Jesus out with the bathwater. It's possible that your church made it impossible to distinguish between the two. But a lot of people don't actually leave the faith. And that's probably more accurate here because you're here today. You're exploring. They just leave their church. They deconstruct their faith. And if that's you, you stepped away from organized religion because you still believed, but you had to catch your breath to figure out what's fundamental, what's essential, what's the things that I need to hang on to, and what are the things that I can let go of. You're confident what's not. You know what needs to be left behind. I think that's good for you because this is a statement that probably isn't said often in church, but I think it's something we should wrestle with today, is a faith that can't be questioned, can't be trusted. We got to be willing to question our faith in order for our faith to grow. Now you're trying to figure out what's worth hanging on to, so hopefully this helps. The biggest thing I want to say, if you don't catch anything else, is this. If you're trying to figure out what's baby and what's bathwater in the church, hang on to baby Jesus. That's a good start. Traditionally, the church hasn't created space for faith to be questioned. Church traditions often make it difficult for our faith to grow up. But I'd like to make sure at Journey, we provide space for people to ask their questions, to answer what's essential or versus what's traditional or what's comfortable, fashionable, or harmful. Author Karen Armstrong gave this helpful thought. We learned about God at about the same time we were told about Santa Claus. But while our understanding of the Santa Claus phenomenon evolved and matured, our theology remained somewhat infantile. Here's something that I've seen firsthand with people who are close to me, sometimes, in some cases, family members. Faith that's not allowed to grow up will be deconstructed intentionally or eventually. Either we do it, or life just kind of throws us enough curveballs to where we slowly fade away. In fact, I know people who continue to go to church every week, but I know deep down they don't actually even believe anymore. They stopped believing a long time ago, but they just like the tradition at this point. And so we've got to be asking questions so that our faith has the chance to grow up. And if that's you, follow Jesus through the Gospels. If you're still wrestling with your faith, he went out of his way to talk to people whose religious systems weren't working for them. So in this series, we're going to try to strip Christianity back to the foundation and the fundamentals. We're going to ask the question, what must one believe to be a faithful follower of Jesus? What's essential and what's not? And to put it another way, what's baby and what's bathwater? So let's start at the beginning. The year is AD 30. There's no church yet. There's no Bible. There's no Christian theology because there's no Christians. There's no hymns or choir. There's just Jewish law, prophets, the temple, Roman occupation, and a rabbi from Nazareth named Jesus. And he was drawing large crowds, and he was saying some things that some people loved, some people hated, some people wanted to kill him, and some people absolutely loved him. And some were just confused. This was 2.5 years into Jesus' ministry. He and his disciples have a conversation, and this conversation is going to give us our first fundamental of the faith. Matthew chapter 16, verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" I'm going to need a different water bottle. This one I spill all over the place. The Son of Man was a title used in the book of Daniel, and it refers to the one that God would grant authority over the nations. So it's a little arrogant maybe, or maybe it's just true, when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. He essentially gave himself a nickname. Do you know anyone who's given themselves a nickname? Can you think of anyone in your mind? I thought of a few that I wanted to share with you. The first one is I watch Friends. I like the show Friends. And Ross at one point tries to get everyone to call him the Rossitron. And it doesn't work. It falls flat. Nobody follows through on that because it's hard. If you're giving yourself a nickname, it's hard to get people to follow through. This one I thought it was great. My son Noah he's on a football team in Hamden, and the third string quarterback has gotten the entire team, including the coaches, to call him the Machine. My thought is he should be the first string quarterback because if you can convince everyone to call you the Machine, that's pretty good. Another one that came to mind was The Rock. The Rock has successfully given himself a nickname, apparently. And my ADHD brain took this further than I probably should have gone. But I was thinking, The Rock, I could picture him saying, "Who do people say The Rock is?" Couldn't you see him saying that? The first, "Who do people say The Rock is?" And I think, I even played this out. I thought, how would that conversation go? He would say, "Who do people say The Rock is?" And then maybe we would start to answer, but then he'd interrupt us, and he'd say this.
"It doesn't matter what you think."
That's for the two of you who might understand that reference. That was for you. I'm just so glad that Jesus didn't respond to the disciples that way. This is how the disciples replied when Jesus said he was the Son of Man. But before I say that, when Jesus called himself the Son of Man, the disciples, in their minds, he had actually earned that title already. He had built that much trust with them. But they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" And this is a great place to start if you're trying to figure out what you believe about Christianity or what's essential. Who do you say that Jesus is? Who is Jesus to you? That is going to be one of the most important questions you can answer. And here's what Simon Peter answered. Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Peter's answer here says a lot. He's saying to Jesus, "I believe you're the Messiah. I believe you're the King. I believe you're our final King." And so the question I want to ask you this morning is, what if that's true? What if that was true? And not just like, yeah, I believe that. But what if you really genuinely believed that Jesus was not just a king, but your king, personally? Shouldn't all of us at this point stop and bow down and worship him and surrender our lives to him and follow him unconditionally? If that's true, it moves Jesus beyond just being a story or just a reference point. It moves Jesus to being our king and our everything. Acknowledging who and what Jesus is to you, me, and all of us is fundamental. I've heard some people say before that they're Christian and they don't acknowledge this piece of it, and it's like, okay, I think you've missed it. I don't think you understand what Christianity really is. This is essential. It's fundamental. And that's a bold claim that Peter made. But Jesus didn't kind of push back on what Peter said. He actually leaned into it, and he said, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood." In other words, you're smart, but you're not quite that smart. "This was revealed to you by my Father in heaven." You are exactly right. I am God's final king. I am God's unique son. That's what Jesus had to say. And here's something that's interesting too, is at that moment, I think all the disciples believed. They all believed he was the king. But give it a little bit later, and they unbelieved. When Jesus died, they walked away from their faith because they had Jesus in their own box, like sometimes we do. We get some non-essentials mixed in. For them, they thought Jesus was going to be a different kind of king. They thought Jesus was going to overthrow the government, and he was going to be kind of a warlord almost. And that's not what Jesus had in mind. So when Jesus was crucified, that's when things changed. When Jesus was crucified, they decided to leave their faith, but then when he rose again, everything changed. Their box that they'd put Jesus in completely changed, and they realized it was too small. Jesus is bigger than that, and so they decided to refollow. This declaration, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God," might be the only thing the church has agreed about for years. It's foundational. It's fundamental, for sure. So the first item on our fundamental list, because we're literally going to create a list every week I'm going to add to this list. The first item is that Jesus is God's Son and our King. To be a Christian and a faithful follower of Jesus, you have to start here. Who is Jesus? Jesus is God's final King. It's imperative that we accept and submit that because everything flows from this. If you get this right, the rest of it will probably fall into place. Before I continue, like I said earlier, I always want to have some kind of application. I can't just walk away and say, hey, this is what we're supposed to believe. And this week, I actually think it's really easy to come up with a good application for this. The question I want everyone to ask today is this. Our point is that Jesus is God's Son and our King. Is that true in every single area of your life? I know It's not always true in every single area of my life. So I've got some work to do. Is Jesus the king of your life when it comes to how you treat your spouse? Is Jesus the king of your life when it comes to how you treat your parents? Is Jesus the king of your life when it comes to your time management, your money and spending habits, what you watch, listen to, and read, how you treat your coworkers and boss, how you speak about people when they're not around, your friendships and who you choose to surround yourself with, how you respond when you're wronged, how you spend your free time, the way you raise your kids, how you use your phone and social media, how you think about your future, how you handle worry and anxiety, how you treat people who disagree with you, your goals and ambitions, how you forgive people who hurt you, your generosity, and what you do when no one else is watching. That's like 20 sermons in one right there. So 20 applications. There's plenty to look at. That's because this is so foundational to our faith. If Jesus truly is king, then we should treat him like our king. I want to go back to the conversation that I had with my teacher back in high school. And imagine that conversation happened a little differently. When I said, "Are you a Christian?" I'm okay if he said, "I'm a Christian fundamentalist." But when I said what that means, what if he had focused on the essentials, the things that we agree on? What if we could have helped each other grow in our relationships with God? Now, there are certainly things that we would disagree about. And those things might even be important sometimes. But if we had that foundation first and said, hey, we agree on the most important things, we would have had a foundation to build from in our relationship. My hope is that at Journey, we will celebrate the essential truths and challenge each other on the non-essential truths. As this church is a new church, I think it's important to talk to two different groups of people right now. If you're a person who's kind of new to the faith or just coming back to the faith and you've got a lot of questions, one beautiful thing about being a smaller church that just started is that I have plenty of time to get to know any of you. If you've got some time and you've got some questions, I would love to sit down and chat with you sometime. When we were launching this church, one of the ideas that was presented to me is, hey, you should try to do this coffee with the pastor ad. And so probably a bunch of you have seen them because they're all, at least on my feed, I see it almost every other post. I'm like, I've seen enough of myself on this Facebook feed. But I've gotten to have coffee with quite a few of you, and it's been an incredible experience. I've loved that part of it. In fact, I'd rather have a one-on-one conversation than doing this, to be honest. I'd love to get to know you, hear your stories, hear your questions in a non-judgmental way, because I have a lot of questions sometimes too. So I'd love to sit down with you and hear your questions. So we've got QR code that's going to be put on the screen, and I actually realized we had this up earlier, journey.churchfunnels.com. If you went to try to give on that, good luck, because that's just my calendar. I had the wrong link up there. That's my fault. Or you could go to that QR code, and that will take you there as well. But that's the calendar, so you can set up a time if you would like to have some questions answered or just have some conversations. The second group I want to talk to is those of you who have been Christians for a long time, and you have entirely different questions, I'm sure. You're more concerned. You're a little more concerned about those non-essentials, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because those non-essentials are also important. They're just not essential. And if you have a lot of questions about all that kind of stuff, I'd love to have some deep talks with you about all this stuff as well. So you're welcome to set up a time as well. I'd love to connect with you. So that is today's first message. Jesus is God's Son and our final King. And if you're wondering what the next fundamental will be, you have to come back next week to hear that. So let's pray together. God, I just thank you so much that you came down and became our King. I just thank you so much that you're a worthy King to follow, that you love us. I just pray that you would help us continue to surrender our lives to you and not just believe that you're King, but act on that belief. And I just pray for the rest of the series as we continue to struggle. I pray that you just help our faith to grow, that we would learn more about you and build a greater trust in you. And I just pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.